Most people do not realize their nervous system is already exhausted until the body begins failing in ways they cannot explain. The racing thoughts at night, the constant mental noise, the feeling of being tired and overstimulated at the same time, the inability to fully relax even when nothing is wrong. Millions of Americans are now living in a permanent low-grade stress state. Their biology was never designed to survive for this long. And the frightening part is that many people have become so accustomed to this condition that they now mistake dysregulation for normal life. So before this video goes any further, close your mouth and hum one steady note for 10 seconds. Pay attention to where the vibration travels. Your cheeks, your forehead, the center of your skull. That sensation is not staying in your throat. You are activating resonance chambers inside your head that directly interact with breathing, circulation, and the nervous system itself. In other words, your body is responding to sound mechanically, not emotionally. And what makes this disturbing is that the calming effect many people spend years chasing through supplements, meditation, sleep aids, and stress recovery protocols may already be hidden inside the physics of the human skull. The vibration you felt a moment ago was not random. Hidden inside your skull are 4 pairs of hollow chambers called the paranasal sinuses, air-filled cavities carved directly into the bones of the face and forehead. Most people only hear about them during sinus infections, allergies, or congestion, so the brain unconsciously categorizes them as useless spaces that occasionally become inflamed. But biologically, that assumption is completely wrong. Your skull was built like an acoustic structure. Behind your cheeks sit the maxillary sinuses, the largest chambers, the ones most people feel vibrating first when they hum. Above the eyebrows are the frontal sinuses. Between the eyes are the smaller ethmoid chambers, and deeper inside the skull, almost hidden near the center of the head itself, are the sphenoid sinuses, cavities so deep that many people experience their vibration as pressure inside the brain rather than on the surface of the face. Each chamber has its own shape, size, opening, and resonant frequency determined by physics. This matters because the human skull does not simply contain sound, it amplifies it. The moment you hum, your face stops behaving like bone and starts behaving like a resonating instrument, and that resonance begins influencing systems most people would never expect sound to reach. What makes humming biologically unusual is that the human body responds to it differently than almost any other sound a person can produce. Speech constantly changes frequency from syllable to syllable. Singing shifts pitch from note to note. But humming holds one stable vibration long enough for the chambers inside the skull to fully resonate. That stability changes the entire physiological effect of the sound. The vocal cords generate a continuous low-frequency signal that travels through the jaw, facial bones, and cranial structure through a process called bone conduction. Unlike external sound, which weakens as it moves through air, bone-conducted vibration travels through solid tissue with extraordinary efficiency, reaching deep structures inside the skull almost instantly. This is why your own hum sounds deeper, fuller, and more immersive inside your head than it does to anyone standing nearby. The vibration is not simply being heard, your body is physically absorbing it. And strangely, most people naturally hum at frequencies that closely match the resonant range of the maxillary sinuses without consciously trying to. The body appears to instinctively select the note that produces the strongest internal resonance between sound, bone, and the air-filled chambers hidden inside the skull itself. That detail becomes critically important once you understand what those chambers begin producing during sustained resonance. Because the moment vibration fills the sinuses, the skull starts releasing a molecule directly connected to circulation, oxygen delivery, stress recovery, brain clarity, nervous system regulation, deep sleep, anxiety relief, and human biological calm itself. Most people have never realized sound could mechanically influence biology. The moment sustained vibration begins filling the sinus chambers, The biology of the skull changes completely. Hidden inside the thin mucosal lining of those cavities is a gas called nitric oxide, one of the most important signaling molecules in the human body. Hospitals use inhaled nitric oxide therapy during severe respiratory emergencies because the molecule relaxes blood vessels, improves oxygen exchange, and increases circulation efficiency inside the lungs. But what most people have never been told is that your sinuses are already manufacturing this molecule naturally every second of your life. The problem is that, under normal breathing conditions, very little of it actually escapes the chambers efficiently. The openings connecting the sinuses to the nasal airway are narrow, restrictive, and slow. So the gas accumulates gradually inside the skull. Instead of circulating aggressively through the respiratory system, humming changes that instantly. The sustained vibration creates oscillating air pressure inside the cavities, functioning almost like an acoustic pump. With every second of resonance, nitric oxide-rich air is pushed out of the sinuses and pulled into the airway at dramatically higher rates. One major study measured nearly a 15-fold increase in nasal nitric oxide during humming compared to quiet breathing. Not a small increase. Not a slight improvement. 15 times, and suddenly the calming sensation people describe after humming begins sounding far less psychological and far more mechanical. Better oxygen transfer, expanded pulmonary blood vessels, increased circulation efficiency, a nervous system receiving biological signals associated with safety instead of chronic threat. This is where the video becomes difficult to ignore. Because the skull is no longer behaving like passive anatomy. It is behaving like a built-in neurobiological regulation system activated by sound itself. And the deeper researchers looked into that response, the stranger the nervous system effects became. That matters more today than most people realize because chronic stress, shallow breathing, poor sleep, anxiety, brain fog, and nervous system overload reduce the body's ability to shift into parasympathetic recovery. Many people spend years searching for supplements, sleep aids, and protocols without understanding that the human body contains regulatory mechanisms to breathing and circulation. The frightening possibility is that modern humans did not lose calm because the brain changed. They lost it because the body stopped receiving signals it evolved to expect. What shocked researchers was not simply that humming increased nitric oxide levels, it was the scale of the increase. One study measuring nasal nitric oxide output during sustained humming compared to quiet breathing found something almost absurd from a physiological perspective, nearly a 15-fold spike in nitric oxide release, 15 times more from nothing but vibration, airflow, and resonance inside the skull. No medication, no oxygen tank, no pharmaceutical intervention, just a closed mouth and a single sustained note. That detail becomes unsettling once you realize how aggressively modern life pushes the body in the opposite direction. Chronic stress narrows breathing patterns. Anxiety shortens exhalation. Constant stimulation keeps the nervous system trapped in low-level threat detection almost continuously. And over time, the body slowly loses access to the recovery states it evolved to enter naturally. But humming appears to mechanically reopen one of those pathways within seconds. Suddenly the feeling people describe after humming begins making biological sense. Slightly clearer thinking, reduced internal tension, deeper breathing, a subtle drop in mental noise. The body is not responding to motivation or belief, it is responding to physics. And once nitric oxide enters the lungs and bloodstream, the effects stop being limited to the skull entirely. Because the next structure responding to the vibration may be the nervous system itself. The moment nitric oxide-rich air leaves the sinuses and enters the lungs, the effects begin spreading far beyond the skull. Inside the pulmonary system, nitric oxide relaxes the smooth muscles surrounding blood vessels, allowing the capillaries in the lungs to dilate slightly. That dilation increases the surface area available for oxygen exchange across the alveoli, meaning each breath can transfer oxygen into the bloodstream more efficiently. The effect is modest, but biologically measurable. And suddenly a strange pattern many people have experienced for years begins making sense. The clearer thinking after humming, the subtle feeling of mental quiet, the sensation that the body has somehow settled without conscious effort. What many people interpret as emotional calm may partly be improved physiological efficiency inside the brain itself. Better oxygen transfer does not create euphoria. It creates stability, and stability is exactly what chronically overstimulated nervous systems struggle to maintain. This matters because millions of people now live in conditions their biology interprets as continuous low-level threat, endless notifications, artificial light late at night, chronic stress hormones, shallow breathing, mental overactivation, poor sleep quality. Over time, the brain begins adapting to constant stimulation until silence itself feels uncomfortable. Many people are no longer exhausted because they are physically unsafe. They are exhausted because the nervous system rarely exits survival mode long enough to recover properly. And that is why the effects of humming become increasingly difficult to dismiss as placebo, because the deeper researchers examined the physiology, the more they discovered that sound was influencing systems connected directly to the brain's regulation of stress, calm, recovery, and human emotional stability. What makes this even stranger is that the sound is no longer affecting only breathing or circulation. Once vibration begins traveling through the skull, the nervous system itself starts receiving the signal directly. Bone-conducted vibration moves through the cranial structure far faster than sound traveling through air, turning the entire skull into a resonating neurological surface. The inner ear detects those low frequencies through the cochlea, but nearby vestibular structures also receive the vibration simultaneously. That detail matters because the vestibular system helps regulate balance, orientation, spatial awareness, and the body's internal sense of stability. This may explain why sustained humming often creates a feeling people describe as grounding, centering, or strangely safe. The sound is not simply entering the ears. The nervous system is physically surrounded by rhythmic vibration coming from inside the body itself. External noise cannot reproduce that effect. Speech interrupts resonance constantly. Singing changes pitch too frequently. But humming maintains one continuous neurological input long enough for the body to settle into it. And this is where the science becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Because researchers discovered that the vibration moving through the skull may also stimulate one of the most important regulatory nerves in the human body, the vagus nerve, the same nerve connected to stress recovery, emotional regulation, heart rate variability, deep relaxation, sleep quality, and parasympathetic nervous system activation. Suddenly, the calming effect of humming no longer sounds mystical. It sounds biological. For millions of people living with chronic anxiety, nervous system overload, brain fog, burnout, emotional fatigue, and non-stop mental stimulation. That distinction changes everything. The body may not be craving silence at all. It may be craving rhythmic signals powerful enough to convince the nervous system that the environment is finally safe enough to stop defending itself for recovery. The deeper researchers investigated the effects of humming, the more the mechanism began pointing toward one structure again and again: the vagus nerve. This nerve extends from the brainstem through the face, throat, lungs, heart, and digestive system, acting almost like a biological communication highway between the brain and the body. It helps regulate heart rate, breathing rhythm, stress recovery, inflammation, emotional regulation, sleep quality, and parasympathetic nervous system activity. In simple terms, the vagus nerve is deeply involved in the body's ability to feel safe enough to relax. And what makes humming so unusual is that the vibration reaches this nerve mechanically. The vagus nerve passes extremely close to the larynx, only millimeters away from the vibrating vocal cords themselves. During sustained humming, those vibrations repeatedly stimulate nearby tissue and surrounding mechanosensitive nerve fibers in real time. The nerve is not responding to thoughts. It is responding to physical vibration. That distinction changes the entire psychological meaning of calm. Most people assume relaxation begins in the mind first. But the nervous system often works in reverse. The body receives signals of safety, and the brain follows afterward. Researchers measuring physiological responses during humming observed something remarkable. Within seconds, heart rate begins slowing slightly. Breathing patterns lengthen naturally, and heart rate variability often increases. A major marker connected to nervous system flexibility, emotional resilience, stress recovery, and long-term cardiovascular health. This matters because millions of people now spend years trapped in sympathetic dominance without realizing it. The body stays prepared for threat continuously. Muscles remain tense. Sleep becomes lighter. Thoughts become faster. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Even rest stops feeling restorative. Many Americans are no longer struggling because life is difficult. They are struggling because the nervous system rarely receives enough biological evidence that the danger has ended. And strangely, humming appears to deliver exactly that kind of evidence through rhythm, vibration, breath, and internal resonance simultaneously. Suddenly, an ancient human behavior begins looking less like a meaningless habit and more like a built-in nervous system reset mechanism hidden inside the physics of the body itself. The effect becomes even more powerful because humming naturally extends exhalation without conscious effort. You cannot hum while inhaling. The body is forced into a slower breathing rhythm automatically. An extended exhalation is one of the strongest physiological triggers for parasympathetic activation ever measured in breathing science. This means humming may stimulate the vagus nerve through two pathways at the same time: direct mechanical vibration near the larynx and slow, exhale-driven autonomic regulation through the respiratory system itself. That dual pathway may explain why a 60-second hum can sometimes calm the body faster than techniques requiring 20 minutes of focused meditation or controlled breathing practice. And the deeper scientists looked into the respiratory changes created by humming, the more they discovered that the sound was altering one of the important recovery patterns inside the body. What makes humming even more biologically fascinating is that the body cannot perform it without changing the breathing pattern automatically. The moment a person begins humming, exhalation immediately becomes longer and slower because the sound itself can only exist while air is leaving the lungs. Inhalation becomes short and quiet almost by necessity. This naturally shifts the breathing ratio toward extended exhale dominance, often reaching patterns remarkably similar to clinical breathing protocols specifically designed for stress recovery. Nervous system regulation, vagus nerve stimulation, anxiety relief, and parasympathetic activation. The difference is that humming achieves this without counting, training, or conscious control. The vocal cords force the rhythm mechanically, and that matters because prolonged exhalation directly influences pressure receptors connected to autonomic regulation inside the cardiovascular system. As exhalation lengthens, the body receives signals associated with slowing, settling, and reduced threat detection. Heart rate gradually decreases. Muscular tension softens. Breathing becomes less defensive. This is why many people unconsciously hum while cooking, driving, rocking a child, or trying to calm themselves during emotional stress. The behavior appears across cultures, age, and even childhood development because the nervous system responds to the pattern instinctively. The body recognizes slow rhythmic vibration as a signal of safety long before conscious thought becomes involved. And once breathing, resonance, circulation, and vagus nerve activation begin operating together simultaneously, the effects move beyond relaxation entirely and start influencing the body's deeper recovery systems. What makes humming so biologically powerful is that the nervous system is not responding through a single pathway. Two separate calming mechanisms begin activating at the same time, and together they create a physiological state modern humans rarely experience naturally anymore. The first pathway comes from vibration itself. Sustained resonance mechanically stimulates tissue surrounding the vagus nerve near the larynx, sending signals associated with slowing, regulation, and parasympathetic recovery directly into the autonomic nervous system. The second pathway comes from breathing. Extended exhalation alters cardiovascular pressure patterns, activates baroreceptor responses, and gradually shifts the body away from sympathetic threat mode. One pathway vibrates the nervous system into regulation, the other breathes the body into safety. And when both mechanisms operate simultaneously, the effect becomes stronger than either system functioning alone. This may explain why some people notice an almost immediate drop in internal tension while humming, even before conscious relaxation begins. The shoulders soften, jaw tension decreases, thoughts slow slightly, breathing deepens automatically. The body begins acting as if the threat has passed. That detail matters because chronic nervous system activation changes the way a person experiences everyday life. Sleep becomes lighter. Anxiety becomes easier to trigger. Recovery becomes incomplete. The mind keeps scanning for stimulation even during silence. Over time, many people stop recognizing what genuine physiological calm actually feels like. They do not feel constantly stressed anymore because stress has become their baseline condition. And that is why the biology of humming becomes so difficult to ignore. The sound appears to recreate conditions associated with safety, regulation, and recovery using mechanisms built directly into the architecture of the human body itself. Not through belief, not through motivation, through resonance, breath, vibration, circulation, and nervous system physiology working together simultaneously. And once researchers began studying these combined effects more closely, another strange pattern started appearing during nighttime recovery and sleep transition states. The effects of humming often become strongest at night because the nervous system is already approaching the biological threshold between alertness and recovery. In darkness, external stimulation decreases slightly. Cortisol levels begin falling, and the brain slowly starts transitioning toward deeper parasympathetic dominance. But for millions of people, that transition never fully happens anymore. The body lies in bed exhausted while the nervous system remains electrically restless. Thoughts continue racing. Muscles stay subtly tense. The brain keeps scanning for stimulation long after the day has ended. Many people are physically in bed while neurologically still in survival mode. And this is where humming becomes strangely powerful. A single low continuous note combines slow exhalation, vagus nerve stimulation, resonance, and rhythmic vibration at the exact moment the body is searching for signals that the environment is finally safe enough to stop defending itself. That may explain why humming before sleep often feels deeper, heavier, and more emotionally calming than during the day. The nervous system is more vulnerable to regulation during nighttime transition states. Some people spend years trying to quiet the mind directly without realizing the body may need calming first. And once researchers began examining what humming might be doing during those slower recovery states, the science became even stranger. The science becomes even stranger once researchers begin looking beyond the nerves, blood vessels, and lungs themselves, deep inside the skull, surrounding the brain and spinal cord, is a constantly moving liquid called cerebrospinal fluid. This fluid cushions neural tissue, transports nutrients, removes metabolic waste, and participates in the glymphatic system, one of the brain's primary recovery and detoxification networks. Most people imagine the brain as a fixed organ sitting silently inside the skull. Biologically, that picture is completely wrong. The brain exists inside a rhythmic hydraulic environment influenced by breath, pressure, circulation, and movement. Every inhale, every heartbeat, and every change in thoracic pressure slightly alters fluid dynamics inside the cranial cavity, and humming appears to amplify those oscillations. Sustained exhalation against partially restricted airflow creates subtle pressure fluctuations that travel upward through venous pathways connected to the skull. Researchers studying respiratory-driven cerebrospinal fluid movement discovered that breathing patterns can influence the pulsation and circulation of this fluid directly. That finding suddenly made humming far more interesting because humming changes respiration, vibration, intrathoracic pressure, and neurological rhythm simultaneously. In theory, the sound may help increase the pulsatile movement associated with brain recovery during rest states and sleep transition. Now, this is where the science becomes more preliminary. The nitric oxide data is strong. Vagus nerve activation is well supported, but the direct relationship between humming and glymphatic brain detox remains under investigation. Still, the possibility itself is difficult to ignore, because if vibration, breath, resonance, and pressure can influence the fluid surrounding the brain, then humming may be affecting human recovery at levels far deeper than stress reduction alone. And once scientists began separating confirmed mechanisms from speculative ones, the distinction became critically important. What began as a simple sound inside the throat was now touching circulation, respiration, neurological regulation, and possibly the brain's own nighttime cleaning system, all through mechanisms hidden inside anatomy. At this point, it becomes extremely important to separate what researchers have directly measured from what science is still trying to understand. The strongest evidence involves nitric oxide production, respiratory changes, and vagus nerve activation. Those mechanisms are supported by measurable physiological data. Researchers have documented the dramatic increase in nitric oxide release during humming, the changes in breathing rhythm, and the autonomic nervous system shifts associated with prolonged exhalation and vibration. Those effects are not motivational theory. They are measurable biological responses. The more speculative layer involves cerebrospinal fluid movement and glymphatic brain detoxification. The physics supporting the idea are legitimate. Breathing patterns absolutely influence pressure dynamics inside the skull, and respiratory-driven cerebrospinal fluid oscillation is already well documented in neuroscience. What remains unclear is the extent to which humming specifically amplifies those recovery mechanisms in ways large enough to influence long-term brain health directly, and honestly, that distinction matters. Because credibility disappears the moment science exaggerates beyond evidence. Still, even without the speculative layers, the confirmed mechanisms alone already reshape how the body should be understood. The human nervous system appears far more mechanically connected to sound, vibration, breath, and resonance than most people ever imagined. What makes this entire discussion so unsettling is that humming may not be introducing something new into the human body at all. It may be reactivating systems the nervous system evolved expecting to receive regularly long before smartphones, artificial light, non-stop stimulation, social media, addiction, chronic stress exposure, 24-hour entertainment cycles, and constant digital noise. The human brain developed inside environments filled with slower rhythms, extended silence, repetitive movement, breath-driven sound, and predictable nervous system regulation patterns. Modern life changed those conditions faster than human biology could fully adapt. The result may be millions of people living with chronically overstimulated nervous systems that rarely enter complete physiological recovery anymore. Sleep becomes lighter, anxiety becomes easier to trigger, mental fatigue becomes constant background noise, people feel tired but unable to settle, restless but emotionally numb, exhausted but neurologically overactive at the same time. And perhaps the strangest part is that the body may already contain built-in mechanisms designed to interrupt that cycle naturally through resonance, breathing, vibration, and sound. Suddenly humming stops looking childish, meaningless, or accidental. It begins looking like a forgotten regulatory behavior hidden inside human biology itself. Not self-help, not placebo, not motivational psychology. Applied neuroscience, applied human physiology, a nervous system regulation mechanism operating through the physics of the body. And once that possibility becomes impossible to ignore, the opening experiment from the beginning of this video starts feeling very different. because your body may have recognized the effect long before your conscious mind understood what was happening. At the beginning of this video, you closed your mouth and held one simple note. What you felt moving through your face and skull was not imagination. It was your nervous system responding to vibration, breath, resonance, and biological signals older than language itself. A sound most people ignore may influence circulation, stress recovery, vagus nerve activity, breathing patterns, and possibly even the fluid surrounding the brain. The body understood the mechanism before the mind did, and maybe that is the strangest part of all. One note, 1 minute, and a forgotten human behavior. Modern biology may need far more than we realized. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow for more neuroscience, brain health, biohacking, nervous system regulation, and applied human biology content.